What do you do when the brother you explicitly banned from Easter knocks on your front door anyway? Wine in hand, smiling like nothing happened. I checked my phone the moment I heard the knock, 11:47 a.m. My stomach dropped before I even looked through the window. 23 guests were arriving in just over an hour. My husband James was in the kitchen with the turkey. My mother and daughter were in the living room. And my brother Marcus was standing on my front step holding a bottle of Merlot and a collared shirt, wearing the expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment and believed his preparation was enough. 3 weeks earlier, I had texted him 11 words. Marcus, you are not welcome at Easter this year. I need you to respect that. He'd read it within 4 minutes and responded with a single question mark. I hadn't replied. A question mark wasn't a response to something that clear. To understand why I sent that text, you need to understand what happened 6 weeks before Easter, at my daughter's 7th birthday party. It started over almost nothing. James had quietly asked Marcus not to smoke near the kids. A completely normal request. Marcus said he'd be done in a minute. James asked again, politely. Marcus told him he was a guest and James should relax. James said this was his home and asked one more time. Marcus told him to go back inside. What followed, I watched through the kitchen window with my hands flat on the counter. James stayed completely calm. He told Marcus he wasn't going to be spoken to that way in his own home and needed him to either comply or leave. Marcus escalated, loudly, in front of 3 of my daughter's friends, in front of my neighbor on the other side of the fence. He said things about James, about me, about our marriage. Things that carried clear across the yard to everyone standing near the birthday table. I went outside, stood between them, and told Marcus to leave. He did, without looking at me. My daughter was standing by the birthday table afterward with the stillness of a 7-year-old who knows something is very wrong but doesn't have words for it yet. I crouched down and told her everything was fine, that we'd have cake soon. She said okay, in the small, careful voice she uses when she's not sure whether to believe me. That night, after everyone left, James asked how long Marcus had been like this. I told him, since we were teenagers, always in cycles, always something small escalating without warning. He asked if Marcus had ever directed it at me. I said yes and told him about 3 specific incidents over the past 5 years that I'd simply absorbed. The way you do with family. James said quietly that what happened today wasn't something he was going to pretend hadn't happened. I said I knew. He said the next steps were mine to take, but there needed to be next steps. When I called Marcus the next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. The first warning sign. When I brought up the party, he said James had started it by being aggressive. I told him I'd watched the whole thing from the kitchen window, and James had been measured both times. Marcus said I hadn't seen the beginning. I had. He said I was choosing James over my own family. I said I was choosing my daughter's birthday over a scene he'd made in our backyard. He hung up. That Tuesday, I sent the text. The 3 weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt like preparation, not acceptance. Marcus didn't call again. Instead, he started calling everyone else. My mother received 2 completely different versions of events within 5 hours of the party. My Aunt Patricia called, having heard there was tension. When I told her the actual details, she went quiet, said she hadn't known the full story, and confirmed she'd be at Easter. My cousin Diane called with the same vague concern and the same realization once I told her what actually happened. Marcus wasn't asking anyone to take his side directly. He was just making sure he wasn't alone when whatever was coming came, which told me he already suspected something was coming. The Thursday before Easter, my mother called to say Marcus had asked to come to her house instead, and she'd said yes. I told her I understood. She said she didn't want the family split down the middle. I told her the family wasn't split. A specific person had done a specific thing and was experiencing a specific consequence, and everyone else was just navigating around it. Saturday night, I told James I thought Marcus might show up anyway. He asked on what basis. I said I knew my brother, and the silence had felt like preparation, and he wasn't the kind of person who accepted an outcome he hadn't personally agreed to without testing it. James asked what I wanted to happen if he came. I said I wanted him to leave without a scene. James said he'd follow my lead unless he needed to step in. And then, 11:47 a.m., the knock. I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me so no one inside could hear. He said, "Hey sis, happy Easter," with total warmth, like the warmth alone could erase 3 weeks. I said his name. He said he knew about the text, but thought we'd both had time to calm down and could just have a normal holiday. I told him the text had been completely clear. He said he'd been upset and said things he shouldn't have. I said I knew. That was exactly why I'd told him not to come today. He said that wasn't fair. I told him I needed him to get back in his car. He looked past me at the door and asked, "Is James going to be a problem if I come in?" That sentence told me everything. Not, "Am I going to be a problem?" Is James going to be a problem? As if the situation had a problem, and the problem was my husband, standing in his own house on Easter Sunday. I told him to leave now. He said this was ridiculous. I said I knew he believed that and needed him to leave anyway. He said Mom wasn't even here, like that changed something. I said I knew exactly where Mom was. He went still. He hadn't known I knew. He said fine, held up the wine, asked if I wanted it. I said no thank you. He set it on the step, got in his car, sat there for 90 seconds while I didn't breathe properly, and drove away. I picked up the wine and went inside. James asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said after everyone leaves. Then I went back to the centerpieces because 23 people were arriving in 68 minutes. My mother arrived at 12:40 already knowing Marcus had called her from the car. She apologized. I said it was fine. She said it wasn't, but she was glad I was okay and put her potato salad in the kitchen. Patricia hugged me at the door and said she was proud of me for holding a limit. The afternoon was warm and full and good, and I was present for every minute of it in a way I'd feared Marcus's presence would have made impossible. That night, after everyone left, James and I sat at the kitchen table the way we always did after big gatherings. I said he showed up, and then he left when I asked. James asked what I wanted to do going forward, long term. I said I was scared the relationship would just be permanently diminished. He asked, would that be worse than what you've had? The answer was no. What I'd had with Marcus for years was a relationship built on me absorbing things that should have had consequences, simply because he was my brother and family absorbed things. The birthday party was just the largest, most public version of a pattern that had repeated quietly for years. The word brother had been doing a lot of heavy lifting. 4 days later, Marcus texted. Not quite an apology. He said he understood why I'd held the line and respected it, even if he hadn't in the moment. He said sorry wasn't going to be enough this time, and he was willing to do whatever real repair looked like, if I told him what that was. The language was different, less defensive. I sat with it for 10 days before calling him. I told him I needed to say things first, and needed him to hear all of it. I named the 3 prior incidents specifically with detail, so there was no room for misremembering. He was quiet through all of it. I said I'd absorbed every one of them because that's what you did with family. Until the birthday party, which happened in front of my daughter, in front of guests, in front of James, in our own home. That was where I stopped. He said he understood. I told him I needed something specific, for him to tell me, in his own words, exactly what he had done. Not what James did first, not the context. What Marcus did. He was quiet long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said he'd attacked James's character in front of people at his niece's birthday party. That he'd said private things about our marriage publicly because James asked him not to smoke near the kids, and he'd felt challenged, and responded to feeling challenged in the worst possible way. I said yes. He said, that's what I did. I said yes. He said, I'm sorry for that specifically. Not for being upset, for those exact things. In that exact order. It was the most accountable I had ever heard him. I told him he wasn't permanently banned from family things. I wanted him to know that. But I needed time, real time, not 2 weeks. And during that time, I wasn't going to be the one managing the relationship. In the past, I'd always done that work. Calling, checking in, smoothing things over. Now it was his turn to try, and I needed to see if he could sustain it. He said he understood. He said he'd try. My mother called afterward and told me something important. That she'd known for years Marcus struggled with things she hadn't named clearly when he was younger, because she'd been going through her own difficult period and had let things go. She said some of what he carried now might be things she should have helped him put down a long time ago. I told her that didn't change what he'd chosen to do as an adult. She agreed. She wasn't excusing it, just giving me context and trusting me to hold it correctly. 2 weeks after Easter, my daughter asked me in the bathtub why Uncle Marcus hadn't been there. I told her we'd needed some space from each other for a while. She asked if we'd been in a fight. I said kind of. Grown-ups sometimes need time apart to work things through. She compared it to a fight she'd had with her friend Sophia, who she'd since made up with. Then she said, I like him when he's not yelling. I sat on the edge of that tub for a long moment. My 7-year-old had already, quietly, filed away the entire problem into its simplest possible form. I like him when he's not yelling. That when was the whole thing. I'd been absorbing the yelling since we were teenagers and calling it family loyalty. She was 7, and she already knew the difference without anyone explaining it to her. I was done letting the yelling happen. 6 weeks after Easter, on an ordinary Tuesday, Marcus called just to check in. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. My daughter's dance recital, ordinary life. Neither of us mentioned Easter or the birthday party. It was the first conversation in 2 months that didn't need to be about something, and that ordinariness told me something important. He could do this. He just hadn't been doing it consistently. Now he was, and I was going to watch he kept doing it. Not every week, but enough that by summer, something different had begun forming between us. Not the version where I carried everything, but something more even. In July, he came to a family barbecue at my mother's house. He and James were in the same space for the first time since the party. They weren't warm, but they were civil. Appropriate when near each other, easy when apart. My daughter ran up to Marcus with one of her drawings, the way she does with adults she trusts. He crouched down, looked at it for a real amount of time, asked what it was, listened to her full explanation, and told her she should start selling them. At least $1,000 each, maybe two. She screamed with laughter and ran off. He looked over at me. I raised my cup slightly. He raised his back. That was him not yelling. I don't know yet if it's permanent or what the next test will look like, but I know how to watch for it now. In a way I didn't, before that birthday party. He showed up on my front step on Easter Sunday, with a bottle of wine and the confidence of someone who believed showing up was the same as being invited. I told him to leave, and he left. That was the moment. Not the argument in the backyard. Not the text. Not the conversation 3 weeks later. The moment on the step, when I held the limit I'd set in 11 words on a Tuesday, and didn't move. Not for the wine, not for the collared shirt, not for the warmth in his voice pretending nothing had happened. I held it. And on the other side of holding it was a Tuesday phone call about nothing, and a $1,000 drawing at a barbecue in July. That's what limits are for. Not punishment. Not walls. Just the possibility of something real on the other side of them.